Hi, I'm Peter Corr. Welcome to Rejoin Rants.
Hi, I'm Lisa Burton, and today we are joined by our guest, Caolan Robertson.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rejoin.
Like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so my name's Caolan. I founded BylineTV a few years ago, investigative journalism. I've traveled across the UK, done lots of films for Byline as well. Did a film in Ukraine with John Sweeney, and have always worked in the film industry.
Great. Peter, for our listeners who maybe don't know you or they're new, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
I'm Peter Corr. I founded National Rejoin March, which is a event-based protesting campaign to rejoin the EU. And Lisa, tell everyone about you.
I'm Lisa Burton. I'm a British immigrant living in Spain. I'm a business owner of a business in the UK. I'm a campaigner. I'm vice chair of citizens' rights group Remain in Spain, and I'm also on the National Executive Committee of European Movement UK.
Cool. I think what we really want to talk about is a lot to do with trust in the media and politics, because I know that's kind of the theme to a lot of the films that you make, no matter what the subject is, Caolan. For me, my mistrust in the media started when I was in the army, because I remember being sat in the army in Germany, reading newspapers, stories about people in the army, seeing that it was just complete bollocks. And I just, from that moment, I kind of thought, well, why are they saying it like that? Why are they talking crap about people in the army when I know that they're lying? And realizing that it's stories just for their political masters, if you like. So if they wanted Tories to win at the time or Labour to win at the time, they'd say whatever against the opposition, because that's really what their goal was. It wasn't really to tell people the news or what was going on. And that's where my mistrust started. You didn't really pay attention to the media when you first got political, though, did you, Caolan? You was more got your news from online sources.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up like most people in my generation, watching stuff on YouTube, watching things on Facebook. That's where I always got my information from. That's why I talked about algorithms being so problematic for so long as well, because they can basically dictate your worldview now. You know, we consume about 300 foot of newsfeed a day. If you printed it all out, which is about the length of a football stadium. And that's where we get all of our information, which is all kind of, yeah, all through the internet. So that's how I grew up, really. I mean, the only time I'd ever see news on the 6 o'clock or BBC or anything like that would be in the background if my parents were playing it. But yeah, that's something it's not the best as well. I think now. I think a lot of the time there was a great period where we thought the internet would be this Wild West moment for information where it's a new frontier. We could people who didn't have a voice traditionally could suddenly become a citizen journalist and put out news and have their own platform. It hasn't worked out in the way I think people expected, because of the way the algorithms work, because that drives people to basically only receive things on their news feeds that are more extreme, or usually, even if it's disinformation or things that make you more angry. It's how all of our worldviews are formed. It's even, this is how things like the Vote Leave campaign was so successful. They understood how that worked. They put out stories that were lies. They put out stories that would make people very angry, and they knew that algorithms would put those on people's news feeds. So it's kind of a broken system, but it was well intentioned. It allows things like BylineTV to exist, which is amazing, but it also allows millions of people to go down really dark rabbit holes and to have a completely walk through of reality. So it's a difficult thing to grapple with.
A lot of people who are watching now might know you from a few viral videos and stuff that's come out recently, particularly your great reporting on Tata Steel in Port Talbot. and that brilliant run-in you had with Richard Tice on Talk TV. But a lot of people who know you may not realise that you did several years ago work with Tommy Robinson, and you were basically his campaign manager and his videographer and stuff like that. And I just wanted to touch on that because I find it fascinating. I think it's always amazing when someone does switch from the right to the left. And I think we can learn an awful lot about that, if you know what I mean, and what made you fall into it in the first, and more importantly, what made you realize, that it was based around fear and misinformation and stuff like that. Would you like to touch on that a little bit?
I mean, to give some context on it, I mean, this ties into what Peter was talking about just a minute ago. I got all my news in 2016 from the internet. That's when Brexit happened. That's when Trump was elected. But it's also when the Orlando shooting happened, when 50 gay people were killed in a nightclub by an Islamist. And I wasn't really political before a lot of these moments. And I remembered trying to find answers as to why that happened. It felt, as a gay person who at a young age, it felt really personal. And I wanted to know why it had happened. I didn't understand what Islam really was. I didn't grow up around Muslims, in the north of England at the time. And I wanted to know why that had happened. And the media did a really poor job of talking about the ideology behind it or even explaining it. And then I remember typing into YouTube, Orlando, and I remember the results that came up were from Rebel Media, which is very hard right news outlet, Milo Yiannopoulos, Lawrence Southern, and people like Tommy Robinson, and they were saying it's to do with Islam, it's a hateful ideology, it's a hateful book, this is the reason this has happened, the Quran, read this verse, read that verse. Hillary Clinton said nothing about it. Donald Trump held up a gay flag and said, I'll protect the LGBT community from a hateful ideology. That made sense with me. Nigel Farage was friends with Trump. And as soon as I watched a few videos about it, which were the first top-rated results, all of the rest of my news feed started to come up with the same kind of stuff on Facebook, on Twitter. I was recommended the same things, but it wasn't just about Islam or the Orlando shooting. It was about feminism being terrible. It was about free speech being eroded. It was about all these different things. And it kind of formed a worldview on the right, I guess, because I'd searched that stuff and I had just been recommended it. And it was kind of, as a young person, that's where you get your news from. That's where you get your worldview from. I didn't read newspapers, and I kind of, not obsessed, but I became sympathetic with all that stuff. And I remember I went to Trump's inauguration protest in Britain, in London, 2017, January. And, there was all these leftist type people, saying, Trump should be not my president or whatever it is. I remember interviewing them, put it up on YouTube. I guess I made them look silly. A lot of them didn't know why they were there. And it was like one of these leftist wrecked videos that hadn't been done before in the UK, but I felt like should be done. I kind of just wanted to contribute to that ecosystem.
Do you think it's acceptable to abort a young girl who could go on to be the future president of America?
Fuck Trump!
Just fuck Trump, that's it? Nothing else? Why is he a dickhead?
Because he wants to shag his daughter.
And that went viral. It got about 2 million views. Farage shared it. And suddenly I got a job offer from Rebel Media, which is the right-wing news outlet that I'd watched that was in the top-rated results. They said, Caolan, we love your video. It was amazing. It was really, really cool. We haven't seen anything like this coming out of the UK before. We want to hire you. They hired me as a presenter, and they said, we've also hired someone called Tommy Robinson, who I didn't know who he was. So, okay. Well, I'd seen him around, but I didn't really know his background very much. I hadn't been that engaged. And he was really charming, really lovely. He said, Caolan, your concerns about LGBT, Islam issues are completely justified. One day you'll be thrown off buildings in this country. Sharia law is going to take over. You're completely right in all this. Very, very lovely person to me. We used to go for lunch a lot. And then Rebel hired him, and we worked together really closely. I ended up directing lots of films.
If you import a culture, you get a culture.
Caolan Robertson worked as Tommy Robinson's cameraman, director and producer for several years. He has credits with the who's who of the alt-right. He's now exposing the techniques he previously used to go viral.
The really loud, scratching, crazy sounds that you heard were added in to create a scary effect.
On the right after that, it took me more and more down that kind of rabbit hole. I ended up losing all my normal friends, people that had normal politics. They kind of disappeared, family kind of distanced. And the only people that I was surrounded with after, fully being hired by Rebel and doing all these videos were right-wingers. Obviously, that's kind of how it naturally happens. So I never my worldview had never been challenged. I felt like I'd gone from a online echo chamber to an online and physical echo chamber, where it's like even your friends, it's the same thing and it bounces off. So it was kind of a complete bubble. I just became very engrossed in it. I became quite a high profile figure in it for about a year. And it wasn't until I decided to make a film with Lauren Southern called Borderless. We went to Turkey and we were going to do a documentary about migrants crossing the border from Syria and then camping out on the shores to get to the Aegean Islands. And we had all this intel about the traffickers that were taking the migrants in. So we snuck into Turkey because they don't allow journalists, especially crazy right-wing journalists, into the country to do reporting. And we camped out on the coast for night after night after night, you know, waiting for through the intel we had for these people to arrive. And at this time, I had fully believed that the people that were going to arrive on the shores would be angry, furious young men, hell-bent on invading Europe, that they were in Europe for ideological reasons, they're rapists, they're murderers, I mean, this is literally what I thought. And the people that arrived through the bushes on the third night were women, young men, but I said, why are you coming to Europe? They said, well, because our house is gone in Syria, because we crossed the border into Turkey and we couldn't stay in Turkey because they throw us in prison, use us as political pawns, and we just want to go somewhere safe. And that seems really obvious to someone listening to this now who didn't go down these rabbit holes, but actually it was shocking. And I remember waiting on the beach with them for hours and hours for the boats to arrive. And it was late showing up, maybe because our cameras had lights and a helicopter started circling. And I had this moment of shared fear with them where I thought, if we get arrested, we're going to go to a prison in Turkey for a while because we snuck into the country, this and this. This isn't comparing our experience with theirs, but theirs is much worse. But I'm just saying it was a moment of shared. And they're going to get arrested. So we left. I didn't know if the boat made it. And I remember the sun started to rise. We drove off and I turned around to Lauren and I was like, fuck, I hope they made it to Europe, which was the opposite of everything that I'd believed for about a year. And I thought, if I'm wrong about something so fundamental, then what else am I wrong about? And why did I have to realize this in real life? And why? And I just had this whole kind of revelation of realizing that, like, so much of what I had seen in this huge, well-funded, very slick institution from all these different media outlets was nonsense. So I just backtracked. I ended up leaving. I texted Tommy, texted Alex Jones. I was working with everyone right now, and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. And they were, annoyed about it.
I've just seen the video that Caolan's posted, so I don't want any of the people who have donated that money to think in any way that I've had any pocket in that money. Just because I know when questions like this get raised, it makes people think.
So has Caolan chosen this path? Or is he different to the members of the mob?
I saw Caolan as maybe, I didn't know him much, but now knowing, I see him as a bit of a victim. I believe he was groomed. I genuinely believe the guy was groomed. There was a fear, there was fear-mongering, and he wanted an outlet to express that.
And it was difficult. And so I disappeared for a year, never wanted to make films again or do anything again. I felt terrible. And then I started Byline because I spoke to Peter Jukes and he had messaged me and said, we noticed you're not doing this terrible stuff anymore. What's going on? And I said, well, I can't pick up a camera again. I feel awful about all the stuff that I've done. And he said, well, why don't you do it not for the left, not for the other side, but why don't you do it for, like, the truth? And he said, why don't you do it? Why don't you make videos where if you would have seen them back in 2016, you might not have gone down the same path you did. So it's why I started the Brexit series with BylineTV. It's one of my first videos, interviewing Ian Perks, the fisherman, when Brexit kicked in January 2020, because that was like the focal point of all the lies that I had believed in. And I found people that voted leave specifically and regretted it. A, because it was like a personal connection to what I'd been through, and that. B, because it was people who. B, because we're not going to get anywhere as a society if we keep people in their silos and echo chambers. We're also not going to get anywhere by keeping people on the right or keeping people on the leave side of things. And I think it's good to have people realize they might have been wrong about something, or to, I don't know, it just felt very personal. And it's kind of why I started doing BylineTV, and I guess it was again, it's not really on the left. It's just getting to the truth of things. It's about combating disinformation. You know, the reason I went to Ukraine was to show that war crimes were really happening, as the right weren't saying, and this was, you know, and working with John Sweeney to talk about, you know, the government's connections with Russia, and you know, it's why I work with Caolan Robertson now, talking about crony contracts and what's really going on, because it's just the truth, which feels natural to do after years of watching lies and making lies, you know?
I feel like you explained why you changed, not sides, I don't like thinking of it as sides, but stopped doing what you was doing with Rebel TV, is because you said yourself that you hadn't really known Muslims living where you was living, but then you had that actual human experience on that beach with other people, and I think people, when they actually just sit with immigrants or Muslims or whatever, realize that, oh, they're actually just another person like me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's
which should be so obvious as well. That's what was so crazy about it. Like, looking back, it's like, well, yeah, of course. But I think people really underestimate what it's like when someone is radicalized in a lot of ways, and when someone truly has, you know, news feeds and a worldview that is that vastly different. Even those most basic things don't apply, and millions of people still believe this stuff, still follow this stuff, still, and getting worse.
So it's really hard, and but yeah, I completely agree. You know, the type of that rabbit hole, and you're just fed these things constantly, and of course it's all based on fear. You know, and I think that's what I find difficult about the politics of the extreme right. Anyway, it's, you have to be afraid of this person, you have to be afraid of this ideology. It's all about fear, and as human beings, we're really open to that. We're programmed to be afraid of strangers. We're programmed to see different faces and things like that. Just today's society, it's just not it's not very good for us to be like that in today's global society. So it's just absolutely fascinating. And your work with John Sweeney as well. I haven't watched that documentary. It is on my list. I was looking at it today, and well done, because it's got some fantastic award nominations and awards there.
It's brilliant, that Ukraine documentary. Is definitely watch it if you haven't already.
Yes, we will put that in the link.
For a long time, Vladimir Putin has been waging war on Europe. His invasion of Ukraine is just one part of that wider war. Armoured cars and tanks and guns are sent to Ukraine. But he deploys more insidious weapons too. To find out the truth, you have to get to the source, right to the front line.
Yeah, I think all your work is, to be honest, even, I mean, I hate to say it, but even your stuff back, when he was with Rebel TV, you look at it, it's well made, it's clever, and you clearly have a talent for filmmaking and telling your truth. Maybe, but you obviously believed in different stuff back then. I think I've told you before, Caolan, that I've got 4 brothers, and all of them fell down that rabbit hole, and I know they watched your content and really did become pretty extreme. I'm not trying to blame you, by the way. I don't blame you, you know, I don't. But watching all that kind of thing, and thankfully they've grown out of it a bit, because I like to think it's because they've got me as a big brother. I don't know, but or maybe they've had kids and grown up a bit. But it's very easy to fall down that rabbit hole, and you could even say I've done it myself in a way, down the left wing side. Like I was following Jeremy Corbyn for a while, and you do, once you start watching it, don't take many video clicks before that algorithm grabs you, and it wants you there because it wants to keep you on their website so that it can show you as many ads as they can, and that's how they make their money. And that's really all it is, isn't it? It's all about.
No, that's really important as well to talk about, that it's not just a right-wing issue. You know, the reason that there's a by-election in Rochdale is because the left-wing Labour candidate was putting out anti-Jewish conspiracy theories, most likely learned from the internet. You know, this is something that is universal. that the internet doesn't have a right-wing agenda. It has an agenda to keep you hooked and keep you angry about anything, whether it's flat Earth or hating Jews or hating Muslims or hating white people, whatever it is. It will take you down any tentacles that you think you have an interest in, and it's. Oh, I mean, it's really depressing. I mean, it's the only thing that's quite nice now is seeing, when you do break through things like Port Talbot, or when facts come out, they still manage to spread, and generally there's a consensus, and a lot of people can still watch it. But I'm very pessimistic about the future of this stuff. We're going to get more online forever. These Apple goggles that have been brought out, we're going to be more online permanently.
They're crap.
We need
that
lessons.
overpriced crap them Apple things are.
Yeah.
No, but you're totally right. And do you think it led you to? I don't know if I've ever asked you this, and you don't have to answer. But did you vote to leave the EU? Did you vote in that referendum?
Yeah, I voted leave. Voted Tory. I mean, I voted Conservative right up until 2019. Yeah, I always have. Well, since 2016. But I didn't vote leave for any reason economically or anything. It's my first ever vote was to vote leave, like loads of young people. I was quite young back then. I was so young. I mean, it was so long ago. So many people I know now, and people who work for BylineTV were too young to vote for it. But I remember it was my first vote, and I did it because I thought Remain looked embarrassing and a bit cringe. I mean, I didn't really hear from them, but I could see Farage everywhere. He was the one that was always on the feeds. The bus was everywhere. It was always on the BBC. And he just seemed fun, exciting, a bit like Trump. But also, as soon as I'd watched some of those videos, I mean, that stuff gets recommended everywhere, but he just seemed more engaging and more interesting. And I don't know how, I just thought it was cool, at the time. I didn't think about what it actually meant. I don't think a lot of people did. I think they just thought, well, those guys are silent, or they don't really look like me, or they're talking about, the Erasmus, which I don't even know what that is, and they're talking about, not being able to take their dog to France. These people don't, a lot of people don't even travel. So it just seemed like an abstract thing, whereas the right was very simple and clean. I liked that messaging. It was, get Britain out. It was leave means leave. It was slick messaging. It just made sense.
Take back control. Take back control. Which I mean, take back control was absolutely genius. I mean, let's face it. I mean, I know many communities in the UK, including my own community in the Rhondda Valleys of South Wales, voted leave. And I know many of those people, including people I know in my family, have never voted before, never thought that their vote was worth anything, didn't care about politics, but yet they got up and they went out and they voted for Brexit, because these people want change, have been left behind, ignored, and the Brexit campaign was very, very clever. It was like, we'll take control of our own destiny, we'll all be better off, and it resonated really, really well. But you also produced the Brexit documentary for BylineTV, The Truth About Brexit, Britain Betrayed. And I would recommend anyone to watch that and not think that Britain was betrayed by Brexit, because it's brilliant. It's been watched over 655,000 times, so you must be pretty proud of that piece of work as well. And it's gone down very well, and it's been, yeah.
What I like about that so much is it's about people, and that's really what this is about. It's austerity really did hurt this country, especially poorer people or working class people, or even lower middle class. I don't know what you'd call them. It hurt a lot of people in this country, and people were feeling on the knees and helpless. So when you had Farage and Boris and that come along saying, we can fix all this, just vote to leave, it's all the EU's fault that we're in shit street. So let's leave the EU, take back control, and we can fix this. It was all bollocks, because none of it was the EU's fault. It was our politicians' fault, and their policies not helping people in this country. Whether it was, I include Labour being in power with this as well. So it was obviously, I mean, I myself, really close to the vote, didn't know, I just wasn't going to vote, to be honest with you, because I was looking at people on the Remain side and the Remain campaign and thinking, well, that's a load of shit. And it's led by people like David Cameron. who I trust about as far as I could throw him. And then I looked on the other side, and it's Farage and Boris, and coming out with that racist poster with a fucking loads of brown people behind Farage, because so many brown people live in the EU. And I just thought, I don't trust any of you fuckers, so I'm just not going to vote. It weren't until I get a lot of shit for this, to be honest, but there was only really one politician at that time, going back to what I said earlier, being down the left rabbit hole myself. I was only really trusting Corbyn. Corbyn at the time seemed to be just saying shit that genuinely was going to help people. And I watched a speech by him, and he said, we should remain in the EU and work to reform the EU. So I thought, okay, then, well, if that's what he's saying, even though I knew people on the left were saying, oh, we should leave the EU because of Greece and all the rest of it. If that's what Corbyn's saying, why is he saying we should remain? And that led me to look into it. And I'm a lorry driver, you know what I mean? I don't know economics and all the rest of it. So if I want to know something about economics, I will go and listen to what an economist's got to say. If I want to know about fishing, I'll go and listen to what a fisherman's got to say, etc., etc. That's how I like to learn things, which led me to eventually vote Remain, but not exactly passionately, just for, well, just seems like the best thing to do for the country.
You must be one of the very few people, Peter, who Corbyn persuaded to vote Remain.
Well, that's what I think lots of people get.
It's like one of those.
People do.
Your secret lever, fight for Remain here. It was, and he's persuaded you with that one little line. Can you imagine if he tried a lot harder, to actually go against what he actually wanted? But that's quite amusing.
But I mean, that's what I like about the documentary, Caolan, is you speak to people, whether they voted Leave or what.
That slogan, which resonated with people up and down the United Kingdom, because people did quite legitimately and understandably feel that they didn't have control in their communities, that they felt a million miles away from Westminster, they felt entirely disenfranchised.
The take back control narrative was really powerful because people did not feel in control, especially after 6 years of austerity in 2016. People felt that they were being financially strangled whilst these London elites were getting by easily, and they knew the system didn't work for them. They knew that they didn't really have control over their system because most of them know that their votes don't really make a difference.
And it's a shame to see it. All my life it's been very busy. People have earned a good living out of the fish, and now it's just gone. He was on the market. He promised to, promised to help the job, And he was kicking off everywhere, wasn't he? And I thought, fucking great, I'm going to vote for that guy. He was on telly giving it the big un, he's doing this, and I nicknamed him Big Balls Boris, I did, because he seems to have a go at it, didn't he? And I thought, this is the guy who's going to fucking help us.
He come on the dock to drag one kit from there to there, like, get me picture quick, and then where he's gone.
So they come here for the photo ops? Yeah. And for the votes, and then you haven't seen them since?
No, they do exactly the opposite of what they said they're going to do.
With us, we have a time delay on most of our produce now. It all takes 24 hours longer to get here than it used to. There are agents' fees of about £250 per consignment, and the consignment is either a pallet or a truckload, so depending on how much you buy is how much that consignment has to get charged. The Europeans now don't have to send here anymore.
People that were Europeans that could travel freely across Europe now can't come into Britain, and that is a large chunk of hospitality that's now missing, and there aren't people there to fill those vacancies.
People have this idea of, oh, you're married to a Brit, you'll be fine. Well, I'm not fine. There was one meme put together of lots and lots and lots of Daily Mail headlines. They were all very vicious about foreigners and migrants and EU citizens. And, I remember one day when they had the big headline of EU rats. So now I'm getting compared to a rat.
If we were given the opportunity to rejoin, then I'd be the first to put my hand up to to rejoin and get back in the EU, even if it involved being more of a part of Europe. I'd go on the road and I'd petition for it if I thought it would do any good.
You're just speaking to people and getting them to tell their story, and that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I think people didn't expect the film to be as it was. I think there's been a lot of films made about Brexit, talking about the economic impact, talking about the figures, the financials, talking about rejoining, and those are all great. But I hadn't seen anyone do a film about the people that voted and regretted it, and what that even means for democracy in Britain as well. You know, like, I even asked the people in Port Talbot when I was there a couple of weeks ago, what happens when you don't vote anymore? Because they say, no, we voted leave, it was a disaster, didn't work out for us, the plant's going to close. You know, we voted in 2019 for Boris. That was a disaster. Now there's no more funding in the town. I said, who are you going to vote for next? And they said, no one. I said, what, ever again? They were like, no, we just gave up. For them, politics just disappeared. It went down the river. It was gone. And you can't have a functioning democracy when that happens.
No.
A democracy relies on people engaging with the political system. And there are millions of people that are never going to do that again because of the lies of Brexit and because of the lies of the Conservative Party. And that's one of the biggest impacts. You know, businesses have been impacted, fishing has been impacted, exports, there's been, you know, people have been targeted. That's all horrendous. But that one thread was terrifying, because that's something you can't get back. You can't get back people's trust in democracy and politics. And that's one of the biggest casualties. And I just despair with it, because I don't think there's any convincing those people to ever vote for anyone again. And they should be voting. I mean, if they have a corrupt Labour politician and things are going downhill, they could vote, well, they vote Lib Dem, or I wouldn't say vote Tory, but, you know, it's good to have a choice. You need a choice. Yeah, it's.
Do you think that changing the voting system for like a proportional representation would win some people's trust back, if they know, actually, if I vote for something, I'm gonna get represented, even though that might bring more extremists into Parliament? It will do, but people will feel represented if we had PR. What do you think about that?
I don't know. Liz Webster has just tried to describe this to me recently, and I didn't quite understand the representation conversation. I need to figure out exactly how that works. I still haven't fully got my head around it.
I don't really understand it.
I don't, which is also a huge problem, because I think it's not got much popular support, because it takes so long to even understand what it is, you know, to convince people in the street. But yeah, I mean, I don't think our system is entirely broken as it is, though. You know, we're one of the world's oldest democracies, and we still have a pretty stable political system. You know, I think the Conservative Party, you know, which is one of the oldest political parties in the world, I think it's something to be proud of. I don't think we need to fundamentally shift everything. I think that the problem has just been we have allowed lies and disinformation to poison everything.
Yeah.
But can that be right, though, if we've got a party in power that has, I think, 20-something% support in the polls, and has been like that for over a year, yet they have such a large mandate with that 80-seat majority that they can pretty much do whatever the hell they want, as extreme as they want, with such a small public support behind them, if you know what I mean.
I mean, we can't have voting every week. You know, we can't change our politics every day, you know, because the popularity goes up and down. This year, the Tories are going to be annihilated, fortunately. I mean, they're going to disappear at the next election, which they have to do. So I think that will be a good thing. That will happen. And, you know, that's, I don't know. I think I'm just going to let that happen.
The thing is, with proportional representation, like you say, it needs a big education campaign. You'd have to decide what type of proportional representation as well. And I don't know them all either. Don't get me wrong, right? What I do know is Spain has PR. Just about every European country has some sort of system of proportional representation.
Really?
And what it actually means is that there's very rarely one party in power with total power. So they tend to have to work together with other smaller parties to form a government. Now, what happens is we have some very far right politicians and some very far left. That's what will happen. You'll have, and you'll have lots of other smaller parties in between. But for me, I think it's a good way of not allowing your country to go too far to the left or too far to the right. Because at some point, you've got to have parties that come together to work together, to form that government and to form policy. It can be a little bit more messy, a little bit, but you would not have the Conservatives with that sort of majority. It's almost possible under some types of PR. So Scotland, for example, should never really allow its system to have one controlling party, the SNP. It's been very close a couple of times, so it's not perfect, but I do think that's the benefit. We would see a lot more parties coming together and compromising on policy and hopefully holding us more to the centre, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, no, I didn't know that there were parties in Europe that had that.
Yeah, it's only Belarus. It's only Belarus that has a first past the post system, the same as the UK, and America's is similar but not quite the same. So it's not the best, and it could be reviewed.
Ironically, they've just changed it in London, haven't they? It used to be PR system for the London mayor elections, and they've just changed it this time to
first past the post. It's another part of the Conservatives gerrymandering. So they've changed now to first past the post. Obviously, the voter ID, the new constituents boundaries. There's a few little things they're trying to throw in, trying to make it a little bit easier for them to stay in power. But it's interesting.
But do you think our media, because it is a lot about the media. A lot of people talk about the newspapers are not selling anything nowadays, yet they still manage to set the entire news agenda every day. Whatever's on them front pages just seems to be what LBC talks about all day, what Sky News talks about all day, what BBC News talks about all day. So whether they're being read or bought or not, they still seem to be setting the agenda, and that does have a knock-on effect and go to online as well. For example, when the steelworks closed down, and that was all over the news, and you're right, Ked, in your video where you say that all they was talking about, they sort of let almost GB News set the agenda for all of the other stations in a way, because all they talked about was net zero, when I remember from before the referendum, they talked a lot about steel and how if we leave the EU, we could save British steel and all the rest of it. And I thought, why are all these things happening? Like fish, we was told fishing could be saved if we leave the EU, and they've been devastated since leaving the EU. We was told farming would be better if we left the EU, and they've been devastated. And now steel, that's closed after leaving the EU. It's supposed to save steel, and I wasn't hearing it anywhere, and I was really trying hard to find information about really why steel closed, because I weren't getting it from any of the media at all until your video came out, and I was like, hallelujah, thank God someone is actually doing real journalism out there, and it was you.
Conservative MPs and Brexiteers like Nigel Farage in the last couple of days has blamed the closure of the steelworks on net zero hysteria or climate policy. How much truth is in that?
None.
Behind me is the largest steelworks in Britain, and it's just announced that it's closing. For the last 24 hours, the entire British media have been here reporting, but if you watch their coverage, none of them are asking why it's closing, why it's happening. It's a significant moment in British manufacturing, and no one's asking why. If you turn on GB News, if you turn on right-wing commentators, if you listen to Tory MPs, they'll tell you it's because of net zero hysteria. So no one seems to know what's going on. But there's one person who does.
Why is it that the Netherlands plant at IJmuiden and Tata's operations elsewhere in the EU are not being affected, and yet it's the UK's operations, and particularly those in Wales, that are taking the brunt of the redundancies? Well, when you leave one of the world's biggest markets, it's inevitable that you will not have the same ability to export unless you put in place a series of arrangements that enable you to do as you did before, and that hasn't happened in the UK.
Has anyone else from the mainstream media asked you these questions in the last 24 hours?
I think at the moment the focus has been on the immediate issues.
So you're saying none of the journalists have asked you about what has caused this yet?
No.
No, thanks. I mean, I was shocked because I arrived. I heard the news at 3 o'clock on a Friday, and I had dinner plans that night. I was going to all these things, and I went, "Oh my gosh!" Because I'd been to Port Talbot for this Brexit film 6 months before, but I didn't use the footage because I didn't have enough time. I thought I knew the plant, I knew the town, I knew everyone in it, so I thought I need to go there immediately. Woke up on the Saturday morning, and we drove down the motorway, and you could see just this super long line of TV vans, and I thought, God, the whole of the British press is here. It was like going to the G7 summit. I was like, oh my gosh. And I was really annoyed. I was like, oh, well, there's no point in me being here. Like, they're already going to cover it. You know, this is a bit pointless. And so I went back to the hotel. I don't know. And I went back to the hotel and I started watching their coverage. And I went, hang on a second, that's really weird. All they're doing is talking about how sad it is and how the town's closing down and how, you know, there won't be hairdressers anymore, which is true and important and terrible. But can we ask why? I mean, literally, this plant is bigger than the town. The steam comes across the whole of the thing. Can we ask why that's closing? Like, is no one going to talk about the actual thing that led to it going? Which should be the most obvious question. And there was not a single report. Like, because I said that in the report, but I looked specifically at every single one, even the local news. And I was like, there is not one mention of why it closed. So yeah, I called the ex-First Minister of Wales. Byline's network helped set a lot of that up. Spoke to local economists from Swansea University. Spoke to the person who's the local councillor, who was a police officer in the town, knows everyone. Spoke to steelworkers, and there was 2 reasons it closed. One is because of cuts and because of a lack of investment in our key industries and things like steel that's been declining for years, for decades. The second was because of issue of 25% export taxes on exporting steel to the rest of Europe, and on the taxes on importing materials and the difficulty of importing the materials. Tata, before 2016, said if Britain leaves the EU, we're not going to be able to function in the same way anymore as well. So all these things are obvious, and they're factual as well, and that is why it closed. And that's, I think, why they reported so well when it came out, because it's the truth. And this is one thing about radicalisation, even though we're all being, you know, driven down rabbit holes, sometimes the truth can seep through and get out, which is nice. But it was really disappointing because I did it myself. I went there on my own with a backpack with a camera in it. Like, and they had the big, huge news crews. They had satellite dishes above their vans. They had 10 producers per interviewer. And they didn't do it. And I just thought, it was, I think it was a terrible indictment on the British media, really. And this is what they do about every issue.
Is. So the media, they just want that headline. They just want the soundbite. They don't go into anything in detail. I mean, I love BylineTV. I also, if I watch news, it's Channel 4 News, because they at least give a lovely big segment to each story and come at it from different angles, you know, and tell you details, speak to experts, you know, and stuff like that. And it's informative, what news should be in media. But the other channels, just little sound bites, quick in, quick out, you know. And so your reporting, which is so refreshing and have obviously enraged a lot of people who wanted to pin it on net zero very desperately. That
was the biggest load of nonsense. Anyone I said in that town, what do you think of the net zero? They went, what do you mean net zero? One person said it's net zero. I said, where did you hear that? He said it was on GB News. God's sake, it's the only thing. And I was like, but no, I was also depressing the amount of people I went to. You know, I was knocking on doors asking people in the steelworks village, and a lot of them had the GB News on the television. But the people that knew what was going on were like, what do you mean climate change, net zero? Yeah, we've got some quotas, but we don't have to do them. This is almost like targets and recommendations. We're not going to be sanctioned by not doing these things. The government didn't force the steelworks to turn to carbon neutral. These are kind of targets and recommendations for the future. Like, there was no obligation, really. It was, I mean, that's one of the biggest lies. And that's why Richard Tice called into that program.
It is exclusively because of net zero that those 3,000 jobs are being sacrificed on that altar. It's got nothing to do with important.
Well, Richard, you said you spent all this time down there. Where's the reporting about it? Where's your video about it? I mean, it's not me saying it's Brexit, by the way, Richard. This is the steelworkers. This is the ex-Prime Minister of Wales. This is literally everyone in the town. Where is it?
The former First Minister of Wales was a massive Ramona.
The only reason that people think it's net zero is because the garbage that was being put out on GB News saying that it was all because of net zero every single minute since that plant closed, and there was nothing to really back that up. Just because we have new targets about green energy doesn't mean that that's the reason that most of our industries are failing in this country, that we're not basically serious on the world stage anymore. We can't export things like steel at the same rate we used to be able to do because of export and import taxes of the type of materials we need to get into this country. This is the steelworks themselves who voted Brexit, your Brexit, who told me on camera, if you watch the report, that they regret that vote because it's made their jobs more unstable.
What do you... Caolan, you are obsessed with Brexit.
Say that I'm obsessed with this, Richard. I'm obsessed with Brexit. I'm actually obsessed with the truth.
I was just about to ask about that. Yeah,
because he was so annoyed because he was one of the people that pushed that lie. I mean, I don't know what he was doing listening to Talk TV at 6 a.m.
Was that 6 a.m? Wow. Okay.
He must have heard you was coming on and thought, I'm going to have him.
Well, I live next door to Talk TV, so I thought at first I'd pop in for a second.
That's very, very handy. No, it was brilliant. You actually owned him then, and he was you could see he was really frustrated, but not being able to get his argument across, and you just, coming at him very calmly, very factually, and yeah, it's definitely the way to go.
And you're right. What I liked about how you come at him was like, well, where's your video then? I went there and actually videoed and showed you the evidence of people telling us the real reason for it. If you spoke to workers like you said you did, why didn't
Where's the report? No, but
Yeah.
I know that he was there. The reason I said, where's your video, is because I saw him there and I knew that he was there. I saw pictures of him there and he was there with the GB News crew. Where's the footage? And I was like, and I knew what had happened. They'd gone there, they'd tried to discredit probably the BylineTV report, or they'd gone to try and push some anti-net zero thing, and they've got nowhere because there is no one in that town with any sense that is going to back that up properly, unless it's someone who doesn't have anything to do with the steelworks that just watches the news. They would have had to delete the footage.
Yeah, GB News have done this before. Now, they're supposed to be impartial. So no matter what report they've got, they should show it, right? At the last March for Rejoin in London, I was one of the speakers, and Gina Miller and GB News were there, and they interviewed Gina. I saw her, Peter saw her, they interviewed a few of the speakers. They spent the whole day going around the march. The only clip they put up was people being stupid, like, so why do you want to rejoin the EU?
It's the classic
that
thing.
sort of thing, They did not show Gina's interview. They didn't show Sierra's interview. They didn't show anyone who would be able to put a rational argument across. In fact, the first thing they said to Gina was, do you not think the people here today are traitors? That was their first line.
Gosh. But this is what I used to do for Rebel Media. This is like the same tactics. I mean, that GB News have Ezra Levant on, who's the founder of Rebel Media. I think people think it's really shocking that I worked with Tommy Robinson, but this is the same people that go on GB News. The founder of Rebel, who hired Tommy, goes on there all the time. They use the same tactics. I'm friends with lots of people. I know lots of people from GB News, and they have watched.
It's okay to be friends.
That's fine.
You'll make no enemies here.
They have watched my previous work and taken inspiration from it. So this is not shocking, but I mean, it should be called what it is, which is extreme right. It's not right wing. It's hard right. With a serious agenda that spends half its time talking about how the BBC is terrible because it's got a bias. It's the most ridiculous network. I don't mind that it exists, but it just shouldn't be taken seriously,
Why
they're not actually regulated. Sorry, Lisa. They're not actually regulated by Ofcom as a news channel because they say they're entertainment, don't they? That's how they perceive it.
This is what Tucker Carlson had to do during the Dominican court case as well, Fox News. And Alex Jones during his Sandy Hook trial was say, no, we're actually entertainers. We're not actually newsreaders. We can't really talk about the truth. And then their audience gets, and then they put out the lie that they're journalists. Tucker said, I'm interviewing Putin last week because I'm a journalist. When in the courtroom, he's, I'm an entertainer. It's a joke. So it's infuriating because I know what that is. But I think, the average viewer at home has no idea about how that stuff works and what's actually going on. Because
it's called GB News. It's got a fucking tick along the bottom, just like all the other news channels. They present fucking on the hour news bulletins. I mean, fucking how?
It's actually worse than that because I did an article on them when they got banned from the Senate in the Welsh Parliament. And I did a bit of research and I found their license from Ofcom. And it clearly states news. It's clearly states news.
So regulated like news, do you know what I mean?
So it's a news channel what they want it to be. All of the politicians, Tory MPs support it, call it news. You know, they're pushing it as news, but yeah, it's the most biased, non-impartial channel I think you could ever watch. You know, it's dreadful. But I was going to ask you, what's the connection, the fascination between the extreme right and net zero?
There is a thing that happens now where no one can be nuanced with their views anymore. And if you're on the right or you're on the extreme right, you've got to tick all the boxes of what it is to be extreme right. You've got to hate trans people. You've got to hate the World Economic Forum. Climate change is obviously nonsense. Mass immigration's out of control. You've got to. These are all the things that get recommended on your newsfeed, and these are all the things that you almost just have to believe to be part of the cult. And no one. I mean. It's just, and this is what the presenters like Neil Oliver put out on GB News. This is why everyone follows this stuff, is because they all fall into this same category of just having to tick all the boxes, of just having to blame everything on climate change, blame everything on the left, blame everything on wokeism, and it's just like a cheap, easy thing. There isn't that much logic to it. It's just the go-to.
I remember you saying on I watched a Joe Politics, I think it was, documentary about your olden days, and I remember saying on that you don't think that Tommy Robinson is even racist. You think he just uses that to make money and stuff. You don't think he actually believes the shit he comes out with. Do you think that's the same with a lot of people down that rabbit hole, whether it's net zero, racism, Muslims, whatever? Do you think they actually don't really believe what they're saying? They just feel like...
Yeah, I turn around to some of these figures when I'd be driving around, and they would do an interview in the car on the radio, and I'd say, why did you say that it was just because of the World Economic Forum? You know that's nonsense. And they go, it's just what they want. And people just put out stuff that they think their audience want to hear that sounds easy. Everyone wants black and white, easy solutions to everything. If something bad is going wrong in your life, it's because of immigrants, it's because of climate change, it's because of WF, it's because of these people. They want easy, simple solutions. The people that propagate all of this stuff know that people want easy, simple solutions, and they say them. There are two types of people on the right as well that I worked with. One is the people that will do it for money. People like Stefan Molyneux who do it for money. And then the second type are people that do it for ideological reasons, which are in the minorities, so 20% of people. And those people are usually far more extreme behind the scenes than what they put out publicly as well. It's usually just a much softened version of it. And that's more dangerous because they want, actual fascism, and they want people to go down those kind of rabbit holes. But mainly it is for money. I remember when I first sat down with the founder of Rebel Media, I was radicalized. So I was excited to talk about politics. I said, I want to, we can change Britain. We'll finally be able to do this. We'll finally be able to have free speech. And he went, okay, cool. Anyway, let me show you our system. It's called Nation Builder. This is how we harvest information for all our viewers. This is how we use petitions to make money from this and this and this and this and this. And showed me for about an hour a presentation of how they make money out of it all. Because that's all it is. It's about selling people easy ideas, simple solutions to make money. There's nothing else to a lot of it. And that's why it's climate change. Steelworks closed down. We can't go into the real reasons for it. Brexit, maybe we were wrong. These people lied about it. Those people lied about it. That's boring. That's too complicated. People want easy solutions. Net zero, climate change, the left, wokeism. They'll just spin a wheel, and whatever it lands on, they'll give it to their audience. And that's what sells. Because people don't have the time.
That is how Brexit happened.
Yeah.
But you do notice, you've got Trump. None of these big figureheads. So you've got Trump, Johnson, even Sunak to a certain extent. They'll say whatever is, at the time is going to suit them. I wouldn't have said Boris Johnson is a pro-European liberal person. Yet he was happy enough to completely change route and jump and say stuff that he probably didn't believe. He's got no convictions, I don't think, of his own anyway. And I don't think Trump has any convictions of his own. And I think even Sunak doesn't have any convictions of his own. They'll just go whichever way the wind blows. just leave their morals and dignity wherever they leave them, just to kind of go down a different route to stay in power. And that's all about power. It can be about power or money. So it's really disingenuous as well, I find, you know, and specifically that people look up to these very wealthy elites who are talking about the elites as well. That's always a funny one for me, you know what I mean? The people talk about the liberal elite, you know, whether that be Jacob Rees-Mogg or Trump, and well, you kind of are there, mate, you know? There's not much arguing there.
Though. Like, I remember, I was shocked about 2019 when I met, 2018 when I was having lunch with Farage, and I got invited, and it was, where was it? Boysdales or something like that in Belgravia. I thought, what's he doing there? And the person that invited me went, well, he lives there. And I was like, he lives in Belgravia. You know, I thought he lived in some, you know, place in the north, you know, drinking pint. And I was like, Boysdales, it's very upmarket. And I realized he's like the pinnacle of posh elite. And I was really shocked by it. But holding a pint and getting the right photograph and saying the right things can be so convincing. I was shocked sitting there looking at
and Farage doesn't
even, one of those.
Farage loves red wine. He doesn't, as we found that out on I'm a Celebrity, didn't he? He was talking about all the lovely food. He likes lobster and red wine. I was like, oh, watch yourself, Farage. You might let the mark slip there, but mate, you know, it's like...
I'm just copying him, really. I live in a mansion. I just steal my shit from the back of a lorry to... it's just a lorry in the garden, really.
Oh, so funny.
So, before we go, what's next, Caolan? What have you got anything big on the plans, or is it just a case of waiting for stuff to happen and running into it like you did with Steel? Or
I like to react to things. I think that's the best way to do it. Always time when you plan something, by the time I get it done, the things have moved on. But I'm going to be doing something with Liz Webster and David Catt a little bit more over the next 2 weeks to talk about how Britain's going to be having food shortages this year. And I'm going to go to supermarkets, going to go to the border. I also have information about these farmers' protests that are happening that's been weaponized by people like James Melville and the crazy right-wingers. So we're going to do something about that.
So, but that sounds really great and very exciting. Like I said, I'm going to watch your Ukraine documentary as well. And yeah, just keep up the good work, keep telling the truth, keep just dissecting things. You know, we all need more of that. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really nice conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. That would be great. Thank you. Thanks, Caolan.
Bye. Rejoin.